I didn't even notice it at first, and that's the part that still gets under my skin. You'd think losing a piece of your own land would hit you the second you stepped out of the truck, like something obvious, like a missing wall or a broken window. But no, it was quieter than that, almost polite, like the woods were trying not to make a scene about it. Then I saw the stumps, and that's when I realized someone hadn't just crossed onto my property. They'd taken something from me that had been there longer than I'd been alive, and they thought they were going to get away with it. I own about 40 acres out in western Pennsylvania, nothing fancy, no big house or anything like that, just a small cabin in a stretch of woods that's been in my family since my dad bought it back in the late 70s. It's the kind of place where time slows down whether you want it to or not, where the air smells like pine and wet dirt, and you can actually hear yourself think. I don't live there full time, not anymore. Work keeps me closer to the city these days, so I make the drive out most weekends, usually early Saturday morning, coffee in one hand, gravel crunching under the tires as I pull in, same routine every time. That land, it's not just land to me. It's where my dad taught me how to swing an axe, badly, I might add, where we built that cabin together one summer, arguing about measurements and laughing 5 minutes later, where I scattered his ashes when he passed. So yeah, I know every inch of it. Or at least, I thought I did. That morning, something fell off before I even got out of the truck. Not wrong exactly, just different, like walking into a room where someone moved the furniture an inch to the left, and you can't explain why it bothers you, but it does. The woods looked thinner. I stood there for a second, keys still in my hand, scanning the tree line like my brain was trying to load a memory that wouldn't quite match what I was seeing, and then I started walking. Slow at first, then faster. By the time I reached the eastern edge of the property, that uneasy feeling had turned into something a lot sharper, something that sat heavy in my chest. There were gaps where there shouldn't be gaps, open sky where there used to be leaves. And then the stumps. Fresh cut, pale in the middle, sap still wet around the edges, dozens of them, scattered like scars across a strip of land that ran along my entire eastern boundary. I remember just standing there, not saying anything, not moving, just staring, trying to count them, losing track, starting over, like somehow the number would get smaller if I did it again. It didn't. There were big ones too, old oaks, maples, trees that had probably been there 50 years or more, maybe longer, gone in what must have taken them a few hours with the right equipment. That's the thing about destruction, I guess, it's efficient. It doesn't take nearly as long as building something. I crouched down next to one of the stumps, ran my hand over the surface, smooth, clean cut, professional, not some guy with a chainsaw messing around. This was planned. Deliberate. And that's when I noticed the tracks. Deep grooves in the dirt, wide, heavy, the kind you get from industrial equipment. They weren't trying to hide it either, just straight lines cutting through the underbrush like a path someone expected to come back to. I followed them. Didn't even think about it. Just instinct, step by step, branch by branch, until the trees started thinning out even more and I could hear something in the distance. Engines, voices, construction. And then I saw it, beyond my property line, or what I thought was my property line. There was a full-blown development going up, cleared land. Framing already started on a couple of houses. Those big luxury builds you see in brochures with names like Whispering Pines Estates, or something equally ironic. Brand new, clean, expensive, and sitting right next to my woods like it had always been there. I stood at the edge for a minute, watching the machines move, workers hauling materials, someone shouting directions, everything so normal, so routine, like nothing had happened, like those trees hadn't just been part of something else a few days ago. Then I turned around and looked back at my land, at what was left of it, and something in me just clicked. Not anger, not yet, more like a quiet certainty. This wasn't a mistake you just shrug off. This was someone taking a shortcut, cutting a corner, literally. And I wasn't about to let that slide. I got back in my truck and drove straight over to the site entrance, gravel kicking up behind me, parked a little harder than I needed to, and stepped out already scanning for whoever looked like they were in charge. Didn't take long. There's always a guy, clean boots, clipboard, not actually building anything but making sure everything gets built, mid-40s maybe, wearing a vest that looked newer than the rest of the place. I walked right up to him. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You the one running this site?" He looked up, a little surprised, but not concerned, not yet. "Yeah," he said, "name's Ryan." "What's up?" I nodded back toward the tree line. You guys been doing some clearing along that edge? He glanced over his shoulder, then back at me, casual as anything. Yeah, we've been prepping the lots, standard stuff, all permitted. I held his gaze for a second. Permitted on whose land? That's when the first crack showed, just a flicker, but it was there. He frowned slightly, like he didn't understand the question. Ours, he said, a little slower this time. We had it surveyed before we started. I let that sit for a second, then shook my head. No, you didn't. And right there, standing between a forest that used to be mine and a neighborhood that wasn't supposed to exist that close, I realized this wasn't going to be a quick conversation. Not even close. If anything, it was just getting started. And I had a feeling they had no idea how expensive that was about to be. Ryan didn't laugh, didn't get defensive either, not right away, which almost made it worse. He just gave me that look, the kind people give when they think you're about to waste their time. Well, he said, shifting his weight a little, we've got a certified survey on file. Everything's been cleared through the county. If you've got concerns, you might want to take it up there. Nice and polite. Dismissive, but polite. I nodded slowly, like I was considering that. Then I pointed back toward the tree line. You cut at least 30 trees past what I know is my boundary, I said, keeping my voice even. I've walked that line for 20 years. I don't need a clipboard to tell me where my land ends. That's when he sighed, not annoyed, just tired, like he'd had this conversation before with someone else. Hang on, he muttered, turning and walking toward a folding table near one of the trailers. He came back a second later with a rolled-up set of papers, snapped the rubber band off, and spread it out across the hood of a nearby truck, smoothing it down with both hands like he was about to prove something important. This, he said, tapping the page, is the survey we're working off of. Licensed, stamped, approved. I leaned in. Lines, coordinates, markers, all neat, all official-looking, and all wrong. Even at a glance, I could tell something didn't line up. The eastern boundary was pushed way further into what I knew was my property, like someone had taken a ruler and just nudged it over. I traced the line with my finger. You see this? I said. This right here. That's not where that line is. Ryan shrugged slightly. That's what the survey says. Yeah, I replied, straightening up, and the survey's wrong. We stood there for a second, just looking at each other. That quiet standoff where nobody raises their voice, but both people know it's about to go somewhere. He finally exhaled through his nose. Look, he said, tone tightening just a bit. We hired a professional firm. We're not just guessing out here. If there's an issue, it's not on us. I almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny, but because I'd heard that kind of confidence before, and it usually didn't age well. Yeah, I said, we'll see about that. I pulled my phone out, started taking pictures, the map, the equipment, the tree line in the distance, even his survey stakes sticking out of the ground like little plastic flags marking a mistake. He watched me for a second, then shook his head slightly. Do what you gotta do, he said. Oh, I will, I replied. And then I left. No yelling, no threats, just got in my truck and drove off. But my mind was already moving faster than the tires, running through everything I'd need to prove what I already knew. Because here's the thing. Feeling right doesn't mean anything. Proving it does. The county office was about 40 minutes away, a low brick building that smelled faintly like old paper and coffee that had been sitting too long. I'd been there before, years ago, helping my dad pull some records when we first inherited the land. Different clerk this time. Younger guy, maybe late 20s, glasses, looked like he actually enjoyed the quiet. Can I help you? He asked. Yeah, I said, setting my keys on the counter. I need the official plat maps for parcel 17B and anything tied to the adjacent development on the east side. He raised an eyebrow slightly, then nodded. Give me a minute. I waited, pacing a little, hands in my pockets, that restless energy building up now that I had a direction. When he came back, he had a stack of documents, real ones, stamped, dated, filed, not something printed off a job site table. We spread them out, side by side, and it didn't take long. See this? I said, pointing. He leaned in, adjusting his glasses. Yeah, their boundary line. I continued, tapping one sheet, and mine, tapping the other. He frowned, then leaned closer. Those don't match. Not even close, I said. He grabbed a ruler, measured the offset, double-checked it like he didn't quite trust what he was seeing. That's almost 40 feet, he said. I nodded once. Exactly. He sat back slightly, letting out a low whistle. Well, that's a problem. Yeah, I said quietly, for them. I made copies of everything, official stamps, signatures, all of it. Then I left and made one more call before heading home. A surveyor. Not just any surveyor either. I wanted someone who'd been doing this long enough to not miss something like that. Someone whose name actually meant something if this ended up in front of a judge. It cost me $1,200. Hurt a little to write that check, not gonna lie, but compared to what I'd already lost, it felt like the right gamble. His name was Daniel Mercer. Older guy, calm, methodical, the kind of person who doesn't say much, but when he does, you listen. We walked the property together 2 days later. Him with his equipment, me just watching, following, trying to read his face for any hint of doubt. He didn't give me much. Just worked. Measured. Marked. Checked again. At one point, he paused near the eastern edge, looking out toward the construction site, then backed down at his readings. Finally, he stood up straight. They crossed, he said simply. I felt something settle in my chest when he said that. Not relief exactly, more like confirmation. How far? I asked. Just under 40 feet at the widest point, he replied. Consistent with what you showed me from the county records. I nodded. And the trees. He glanced at the stumps, then back at me. All on your parcel. No hesitation. No maybe. Just fact. We spent the rest of the afternoon documenting everything, marking each stump, taking measurements, logging locations. It turned into something almost clinical, like we were cataloging evidence instead of mourning what used to be there. 33 trees in total. I remember that number sticking with me. Not 30. Not about. 33. Each one a line item now, something that could be counted, valued, argued over. Which is exactly what I did next. I brought in a timber appraiser, a woman named Lisa Grant, sharp, direct, didn't waste words. She walked the site with a notebook in hand, occasionally crouching down, examining growth rings, bark patterns, the spread of the roots, like she could still read the history of each tree even after it was gone. These were healthy, she said at one point, almost to herself. Good maturity, strong growth. These weren't ready to come down. How much? I asked. She looked up at me. You want timber value or replacement value? I hesitated for a second. What's the difference? She gave a small, knowing smile. About $60,000. That got my attention. She explained it as we walked. Timber value was basically what the wood was worth if you cut it and sold it. Simple, straightforward, but replacement value, that was different. That accounted for time, growth, impact. You can plant a new tree, she said, but you can't replace 50 years overnight. The law recognizes that, at least in this state. By the time she finished her report, the numbers were clear. Timber value, around $28,000. Replacement value, just under $90,000. $89,000. I stared at that number for a long time. Not because I wanted the money, not really, but because it finally translated what I'd lost into something they couldn't ignore. So I put everything together, the survey, the county records, the photos, the appraisal, organized, labeled, airtight, and sent it off to the development company. Certified letter. Signature required. No way to pretend they didn't see it. I gave them a number. $89,000. Not a dollar more. Not a dollar less. And then I waited. 2 weeks later, I got their response. From a lawyer. Of course. Typed, formal, full of language designed to sound confident without actually saying much. And right there in the middle of it, the part that mattered. They denied everything. Said their survey indicated they operated within their property boundaries, said my claims were unsubstantiated, said I had provided no conclusive proof. I remember reading that and just laughing. Not because it was funny, but because it told me exactly what kind of fight this was going to be. So I sent it all again, this time with even more detail. GPS coordinates, stamped records, Mercer's full report, Grant's valuation, everything short of walking it into their office and pinning it to the wall myself. Then they went quiet. For about a week. And when they came back, the tone had changed. Still careful. Still legal. But different. They acknowledged there might have been an error. Offered $15,000. I didn't even respond right away. Just sat with it. $15,000 for 33 trees. For 50 years of growth. For the piece of land my dad had trusted me to take care of. No. I wrote back with one line. $89,000. That's when the real back and forth started. $30,000. No. A little more discussion. Still no. And then finally, the message that told me we were past negotiation. We'll see you in court. I remember setting my phone down after reading that, leaning back in my chair, staring at the ceiling for a second. And then, slowly, I smiled. Because they thought this was about the money. It wasn't. Not anymore. It's funny. The moment they said, "We'll see you in court," something in me actually relaxed. Not because I wanted to fight. I'm not that guy. Never have been. But because it meant we were done pretending this was a misunderstanding. It wasn't. It was a decision they made to trust a bad survey, to move fast, to cut first and double-check later. And now they were going to have to stand behind that decision in a place where facts mattered more than confidence. So I hired a lawyer. Her name was Caroline Hayes, mid-50s, sharp as glass. The kind of person who doesn't raise her voice because she doesn't need to. She'd been dealing with property disputes for over 20 years, and within 10 minutes of sitting across from her, I could tell she'd already mapped out the entire case in her head. She flipped through my documents slowly. Mercer's survey, Lisa's appraisal, the photos, pausing here and there, asking short, precise questions. Then she leaned back. "They trespassed," she said, "and they destroyed timber on your land." I nodded. "That's what I figured." She gave a small smile. "Good, because in this state, that's not just damages, that's statutory." I frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means," she said, tapping the appraisal report, "the court can award up to 3 times the value of what they took, especially if it's deemed negligent." I sat there for a second, letting that sink in. 3 times 89,000. She nodded. 267. I exhaled slowly. "Well," I said, "that changes things." She didn't smile that time. "It changes how they're going to feel about this," she replied. "We filed the lawsuit that week. Not small claims, not some quick settlement court. A full civil case, trespass, property damage, violation of timber statutes, everything laid out clean and direct. And just like that, it got real. Their tone shifted almost immediately. The same lawyer who'd brushed me off in that first letter was suddenly a lot more interested in talking. Calls started coming in, emails got longer, more careful. They wanted to revisit settlement discussions. Of course they did. Caroline handled most of it. I'd sit in her office sometimes, listening as she went back and forth with them on speaker, her voice calm, almost casual, while on the other end you could hear the tension creeping in. "We're willing to offer 40,000, their lawyer said during one of those calls. Caroline didn't even blink. "My client is seeking full statutory damages," she replied. "That's already been filed." A pause. "That's excessive." "No," she said. "What's excessive is removing 33 mature trees from land you don't own." I remember trying not to smile at that. They didn't like her. Which, from what I could tell, meant we'd picked the right person. Discovery started soon after, and that's where things began to unravel for them. Because up until that point, they'd been operating on assumption, on their version of events, but discovery forces everything into the open. Every document, every email, every decision. We turned over everything we had clean, organized, consistent. Mercer's findings, Lisa's valuation, photographic evidence, timelines, even lined up expert testimony if it went that far. They tried to poke holes in it. Of course they did. First thing they went after was Lisa, my appraiser. Filed a motion to disqualify her, claimed her valuation methods were inflated, subjective, not grounded in standard practice. Caroline barely looked concerned. "This won't go anywhere," she told me. She was right. The judge denied it, flat out, which didn't just keep Lisa in the case, it signaled something else too. The court was taking this seriously. That's when they changed tactics. If they couldn't discredit the value, they'd try to reduce it. So they brought in their own expert. Older guy, suit a little too stiff, the kind of witness who sounds convincing until you listen closely. His claim? The trees weren't healthy. Said they showed signs of disease, that their lifespan was already limited, that the replacement value should be significantly lower because of that. I remember hearing that and just shaking my head, because I knew those trees. I'd walked that land for years, watched those canopies fill out every spring, drop leaves every fall. There was nothing wrong with them. And more importantly, the stumps told the truth. Lisa went back out there, documented everything again, more detailed this time. Growth rings, coloration, density, all the indicators of strong, healthy trees. When she wrote her rebuttal, it wasn't emotional, it was precise. Clinical. and it dismantled their argument piece by piece. Full vitality, she wrote. No evidence of systemic disease. Their expert didn't have much to say after that. Weeks passed. Depositions. Filings. Back and forth that felt endless at times, but every step of it leaned just a little more in our favor. You could feel it, even before anything was decided. And then, about 3 weeks before the trial date, everything shifted. Caroline called me late in the afternoon. They want to settle, she said. I leaned back in my chair. Of course they do. They're asking where you're at. I didn't answer right away. Just looked out the window for a second, thinking about that strip of land, those stumps, that first morning when something fell off. Same place, I said finally. She nodded, even though I couldn't see her. I'll let them know. The next offer came in the next day. Higher. A lot higher. 175. I'll be honest, that number made me pause. Not because it was tempting in the way they probably thought, but because it meant they understood now. Understood what they'd done. Understood what it was going to cost them if this went in front of a jury. Caroline didn't push me either way. That's a strong settlement, she said. But it's your call. I thought about dragging it out, about going all the way to trial, making it public, letting a courtroom spell it out for them in black and white. But then I thought about something else. Time. Energy. And what I actually wanted at the end of all this. It wasn't revenge. It was restoration. Take it, I said. She nodded. I think that's the right move. The agreement came together quickly after that. Signatures, terms, final numbers, $175,000 in damages. But that wasn't all. Because part of the settlement, something Caroline had pushed for from the beginning, was environmental remediation. They had to fix what they'd broken. Replant the area with native species. Restore the soil. Bring in specialists. Another $23,000 on their end. Plus one more requirement that I found almost poetic. They had to hire a new surveyor. Redo their entire site plan. Correct every boundary. And until that was done, construction slowed to a crawl. For months of delays. All because someone decided to save a little money on the front end. I went back out to the property not long after everything was finalized, stood in that same spot along the eastern edge, looking out over what was left. It was still quiet. Still mine. Just changed. I used about $45,000 of the settlement to hire a professional forester. Didn't just want to replace what was lost. I wanted to do it right. We planted over 200 native saplings, a mix designed to actually support the ecosystem, not just fill space, laid out a long-term reforestation plan that, if I'm lucky, will outlast me. It'll take years for it to look the way it used to. Maybe decades. But that's the thing about land. You don't really own it. You take care of it for a while. And sometimes, that means standing up for it when nobody else will. Now here's the part one still go back and forth on. Because yeah, I got compensated more than I asked for originally, more than I expected if I'm being honest. And yeah, they paid for their mistake, financially, legally, reputationally. But those original trees? They're still gone. 50 years of growth, erased in a day. No settlement changes that. So I'll ask you this. If you were in my position, would you have taken the deal? Or would you have pushed it all the way, made an example out of them in court, no matter how long it took? Because I still don't know if I chose the practical ending, or just the easier one. If this story got you thinking, hit like, subscribe, and tell me what you would have done. I read every comment. And trust me, I'm curious where you land on this.